certain layers that you'd rather pass through very quickly or not pass through at all. And others that you'll want to bask in and hang out in. The longer you stay with your experience and the more present you are to your experience, it is going to begin to have a depth to it. And how far and how deep you'd like to go is up to you. But we could say that our journey is a journey toward that mysterious core of our being. And as you are making this descent, you're invited at each level of understanding to drop, to leave behind something that you think you know. And there's no force or pressure in this. But if you're willing, you can set aside your name. You can set aside your age. You can set aside your preferences. You can set aside your accomplishments. Finally, to set aside everything you know, everything you think you know. And perhaps to begin to acknowledge, to begin to admit that you don't really know anything. But to acknowledge this not for the sake of admitting failure or not being enough, not knowing enough, but for the sake of making yourself completely new and clean. This journey of descent is going to take everything away from you. It's going to take away all of your previous understanding, all of your learned knowledge and experience. And it's going to introduce you to a mystery. A mystery that I can't speak in words. A mystery that you can't comprehend with your logical mind. But if you will dive, if you will descend, exists in your core. Nobody knows or can say what you'll find when you get there. Because it's a mystery. And the more you move into the mystery of your own being, the more you realize you don't know anything. And the less certain you become. And the less meaningful is the acquired knowledge that you have. And this can be a relief. It can also be frightening. And you know, at a certain point in the descent, things start to look pretty dark. All of the things that we're used to seeing and experiencing aren't there anymore. So it's an entrance into a dark and unfathomable mystery. There is not much for you to do but relax, to drop, to fall, to float. When you realize that this is the essence of meditation, dropping and falling and floating, you are less concerned with what you're supposed to be doing. You're less concerned with any kind of activity. And as you begin discovering more and more of this mystery that is in your core, see just how big it is. Does it have boundaries or edges? If you start taking things too seriously, just listen to the water dropping on the pavement. Just feel the rhythm of your breathing. Know that that's enough. Because even this, the water dropping on the pavement or the rhythm of your breathing, can lead to a descent. Keep in mind that nothing can trouble you unless you give it the power to do so. And on this journey of descent, whatever you might find can be embraced, can be welcomed in love, can be accepted. You may recognize this mysterious core of your being through the many questions that your mind has, the many uncertainties that you hold in your experience, the groundlessness, the searching for answers, the looking for solutions, the trying to fix, the trying to change. And realize that underneath it all, underneath all mind activity, right here, right now, as the very core of your being, there is just an indescribable mystery. One that you can't solve, one that you can't explain, one that doesn't bend itself and twist itself into your demands that it be a certain way. If you find yourself striving or trying or efforting in some way, realize that you're just trying to get a handle on the mystery. That instead of efforting or trying or controlling, that you can just accept that this mystery is unknowable to you. That you're not going to understand it through the usual means. That you're not going to control it. You're not going to teach it how to do things your way. And you might come to simply bow to it, to surrender to it, to give yourself to it. So this journey of descent that we're working with is not one that really begins and ends. We simply pick up with it where we leave off. So if we are in the midst of descent and we suddenly find that something else snags our attention, we'll go off and we'll explore that thing that has snagged our attention, but we'll come back to the same place we are in our descent. So in this way, you don't need to necessarily keep yourself forcibly on track or in any one direction, but at the same time, to remain open to a continual deepening or expansion. It's always possible in our experience it's always possible to come to false conclusions. Let's just put it that way. It's always possible to come to false conclusions. Which I think is partially what troubles us or bothers us, is that spiritual awakening or human growth, to put it more simply, isn't something that you can have certainty over in the way you have certainty in completing a mathematical problem or remembering the capital of Georgia. It's not like that. It's not at all like that. And many people are frustrated or deterred from real spiritual or psychological work because of its nature and the way in which our logical mind is not able to solidify or make certain the mysterious components of the path. But it doesn't stop us from thinking that it's possible that there's going to be some kind of certainty that we're going to discover. And this sort of points to something that we've lived with our whole lives, probably, of looking around and perhaps observing others and feeling like they got it, they know, they've succeeded, or they understand something. So we can't help but look at someone like Jesus or Buddha or Rumi or Muhammad or any of these great characters. Or if you're not into that scene, it's whomever, it's the intellectuals or it's the sports people or it's the movie stars or whoever it is that in your world becomes idealized, right? So it could be Buddha, it could be Einstein, it could be George Clooney, I don't know. It could be anybody that your mind looks up to as the one who has figured it out, right? And it's virtually impossible for us to recognize that what they have, what the Buddha has, what Einstein has, what George Clooney has, isn't what we think it is. Because we look at their life and we look at their contribution, maybe. We look at what the Buddha taught, or what Einstein realized, or what George Clooney has accumulated, what have you. And it's very easy to look at that and make a kind of assumption, right? Or a comparison between where they are and where I am, But let's say that you have this idealization of the Buddha. Let's say that you have a very clear feeling of where the Buddha is and where you are. How will you know when you get to where the Buddha is? Isn't that a question that we're troubled by often? I hear it a lot. People ask questions like, when I'm in touch with my true being, how will I know? Right? When I'm truly awake or truly aware, how will I know? And this points to something very deep and often conflicting within us, is that we want to know. We don't want to just get enlightened, we want to know that we're enlightened. You know what I mean? But there's a problem in that. Because when you're enlightened, you won't be there to know you're enlightened anymore. Because if you're enlightened and you know you're enlightened, there's two people there. There's the one who got enlightened and the one who knows it. Right? So automatically we have a little bit of a problem. We won't talk about that too much because that just gets kind of heady. But there is this piece in us that's looking for some kind of certainty. There is this piece in us that's looking for some kind of stability, some kind of ground. And we expect that as we go further in our journey, whether it's the journey of enlightenment or the journey of growth or just being a good, solid human being, that we're going to arrive at some kind of solidity, that we're going to arrive at that ground. And if we just dig deep enough, or if we just plow hard enough forward, or if we just put ourselves to the task enough, we will find that certainty. And, you know, the more you discover that you don't have certainty, the more arduous you typically get about finding certainty. That's the way most people are built. Or you get frustrated and quit. But here's this drive. We have this drive in us, right? And despite all the evidence to the contrary, that you can't find certainty, that you can't find ground, there's still something in us feels like, well, that's what I need to find. I need to find certainty. I need to find ground. I need to find what's solid. And you go on, and you go on, and you go on, and you go on thinking, well, I just haven't found it yet. I just haven't discovered it yet. Never occurring to us that maybe that's because that's how it's supposed to be. Maybe you're not going to find a solid ground and a certainty, right? That doesn't typically occur to us because our drive to find that ground and certainty is so strong. And so why would we have this drive if there wasn't anything to find? Why would that exist in us if there wasn't anything to find? And this can go on for some time, you know. I know that at least some of you know what I'm talking about. If others don't, you will, you know, somewhere along the way. You know, and then we reach kind of these moments of failure where it feels like what you're after you haven't found yet, and so you get down on yourself and frustrated with yourself. And after you go through that, you make the conviction that you're going to work even harder next time. You're going to meditate even deeper. You're going to read even more closely, or you're going to say your prayers with more intention, whatever it may be, right? And that feels good for a little while, and then you come around to the same thing. You still don't have the certainty. You still don't have that sense of ground underneath. And for most of us, we'll go through 100,000 incarnations of this. In fact, that's what's meant by the phrase reincarnation. Until we come upon the fact that in all of this effort and in all of this attempting, it hasn't happened. And we actually just take a good, sober look at that truth. That we haven't found the certainty we want. We haven't found that sense of knowing, right? And it's usually at that point where we start to look at the Buddha or Jesus or Einstein or whoever, and we say, but they figured it out. He, she figured it out, right? I can see it. They figured it out. But there's a difference between the Buddha and us. I mentioned this in class. The difference isn't that the Buddha figured it out and we haven't. The difference is that the Buddha has stopped looking. The difference is that the Buddha is no longer searching for a certainty that doesn't exist. And for that reason, his life is free. Right? And so you could say that in that way, he's figured it out. But he didn't figure it out by figuring something out. He figured it out by figuring nothing out.
Could you say that the Buddha came to the conclusion, awareness, understanding that uncertainty isn't a problem?
Yeah. Yep.
Even if it exists, it's maybe an adventure.
I would say, exactly. I would say that, yeah, even beyond coming to the realization that it's not a problem, his realization must have included that not only is it not a problem, it's actually something that is just right. that it's important that it is that way. Right? But it's very easy, It's like, I was talking to someone the other day on the phone, and we were doing a little work together, and she was telling me her mental versions about my life. She was making a number of assumptions about my life, which I think in her version, I was like sitting in meditation all day long on the couch or something, It was kind of one of those things where you make certain assumptions about how a person is or how they live or what their life is like, and you're not at all right about it, right? But what we started to talk about was this unconscious projection that we have, right? That somehow people, or it's easier to talk about someone like the Buddha, this idealization that, the Buddha he never got angry, he never got confused, he never got sad. Well, how do you know? How do you know that the Buddha never got that, right? There had to be a reason why the Buddha was seeking the solution to suffering, right, in the first place. My point is that until we begin to work with the actuality of our situation and stop focusing on what we think is possible or what we think is going to happen, and we just start working with the reality of our experience, we can't come to these beautiful realizations that are possible. Because if we are just convinced that there's a solution to our sense of uncertainty and we go about looking for it, we never arrive at the fact there may be nothing wrong with this uncertainty at all. It may be just exactly what I need, right? And we can't do that when we're looking at somebody else. Because by all means, when you see the power of what someone like Buddha was like, or Jesus, or Einstein, or George Clooney, it seems impossible that they haven't figured something out. It seems incredulous that they have not figured something out. And so what we normally do is we go to the teachings of Buddha or Einstein or whomever, and we think, I want to derive that knowledge. I want to put that knowledge into me so that I have it. And we go on sort of operating that way, but we don't realize that's not the truth. Right? That they don't have something special in the way of knowledge or experience or understanding or, And the sooner that we are able to comprehend that and understand that and be willing to work with our experience as what's precious and sacred, the sooner we get on to understanding what they understood. But we don't get it through reaching. We don't get it through grasping. We don't get it through... Jesus said something really beautiful. He said, nobody gets to the Father but by me, which has been vastly misinterpreted. Christian religions have taken that statement to mean Jesus is the authority. Unless he stamps your ticket, you're not getting in. It's not at all what it means. What it means is, until you come to the place of absolute not knowing, until you come to the absolute mystery of who you are, until you come to the Christ within you, there's no possibility of anything, right? And so, to get to the Father, and the Father is simply that innermost truth at our core, you have to go through Jesus. It's not that you go through Jesus. You go through the method, you go through the directness that Jesus embodied, right? Which is to say that you get in touch with your experience. You start to know who you really are. You drop your search for certainty. You drop your search for answers. You drop your search for ground. You get in touch with your groundlessness. And in that getting in touch with, we're face to face with the mystery of who we are. And instead of rejecting that or fighting that or seeking solutions to that, we're just faced with that truth. I mean, there's not one of us in this room that can sit here and say, well, I know who I am. And if you do say that, you're lying. I don't mean that meanly, it's just the truth. You're lying. You don't know who you are. The best you can do is think that you know who you are. But thinking who you are doesn't make you who you are. Right? Because your thoughts about yourself can change.
A little while back, I was having a day where I was feeling very uncertain about who I am, and I was reflecting back on how I used to think I was a very confident person, and I could see all the reasons why I felt confident in the past, and they were a lot of things I had acquired, or false masks I had applied to make myself be able to feel that way in certain situations. But in this particular day, I was feeling very not confident, and I actually picked the phone up and called a friend who had known me for about 5 years. And 5 years ago, I felt like I was in this confident place. And I actually said to them, will you tell me what you thought of me the first time you met me? And they said, well, you came across as a really confident person. And I was like, my God, if they saw that in me 5 years ago, then I must be confident. But it was such a game, I was looking for somebody to take away that feeling of not knowing, because I wasn't okay with just sitting with that and experiencing it all the way.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's just kind of like a really simple sort of,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not every day, we probably don't care every day.
In this way, our ego is a lot like Swiss cheese, right? It's full of holes. It's full of holes. And what most people do is they try to find some cheese to put in the hole, so that you feel a little more confident, a little more solid, a little bit more like you know what you're talking about, a little bit more enlightened and important and special and all of those things. But the truth is that, you know deep down you're full of holes. And not only are you full of holes, but at the center there's a big, fat, huge hole, right? And we're trying desperately not to experience that. Because being Swiss cheese feels bad. It feels bad. But it's not really being Swiss cheese that feels bad, it's rejecting being Swiss cheese that feels bad. In other words, it's not a lack of confidence that feels so bad when we experience it. It's rejecting the lack of confidence that you're perceiving that feels bad. Because anytime we move into a state of rejection, what typically is happening in the human being is some beautiful truth is being revealed to you, and you're saying, no thanks, don't want that, don't want to look at that, don't want to face that, don't want to feel that. But there's a beautiful truth being presented to you in that moment. And because we associate the holes in our Swiss cheese with deficiencies or inadequacies about ourselves, we go about looking for, there must be a solution to this confidence problem. I must be able to fill this hole somehow, right? I'll earn a little extra money. I'll read another book. I'll get another degree. I'll have another spiritual experience. Then I'll feel confident. But then there it is. There's that little hole peeking up into consciousness again. Oh, don't feel confident. If we could see that these holes we experience are intelligent design that is leading us into the mysterious core of who we are, we wouldn't be so quick to reject them. We wouldn't be so quick to see them as problems that need to be solved. But I understand why we do, because it hurts. It's painful to face what feels like an inadequacy. In India, if you ask people questions, they will give you answers whether they know the answer or not. Because it's more comfortable to give you a false answer than to be someone who doesn't know. you know? And we do that too. It's not just in India, but in India, they've like it's an art, you know? It's like you ask for directions and like, well, you go down that way and you go right. It's like, okay, you follow it, and you're like, wait a minute.
That's why
It didn't take you at all.
Indian tech support can be a nightmare.
Yes.
Because they will tell you they know
There-
and they don't.
There's more interest in pleasing you than there is in telling you the truth that they don't know. Right? And we do that too. Certain types of people do it more than others. But isn't that a truth that we're doing within ourselves all the time? I'd rather tell myself some truth, even if it's not true, than face the real truth. You know, I don't know. That's too scary to admit. So I'll make up something that I think I know. You know? So what thought? Go ahead.
If I have a thought, I'm really appreciative that I stayed today because I honestly got anxious. It's like I'm going to go outside. But I was brushing my teeth the other night, and I had this moment where I looked at myself in the mirror when I was done my public examining my course or something. And I looked at myself, and I think I was just like, I don't know. I don't know who I am.
Uh-huh.
And what is this anyway? And I've gotten to that place before, and I've like had that laughter that's like comfortable with not knowing. And that night it was just like this shaky, like I don't know, I'm going to bed. You know, that literal like closing down and going to sleep because it was just too much. I just couldn't deal with it.
Yeah.
And it was just so shaky, and you know, I was like, how much longer do I have to do this for? How much longer do I have to not know? It's like that's the rest of my life. You know, another day or another 50 years or whatever, you know. But
Yep.
it was terrifying
Yes.
in that moment.
Yep.
And I just was like, yeah, I'm not doing this.
Yep. Isn't that how it is? We don't know, and we're almost okay with not knowing, but the sense that not knowing is just going to drag on, that it's just going to go on forever, that's a scary proposition, because then it starts to look like a big fat void.
Yeah.
It starts to feel like a big fat void that you're going to get drawn into, a big black hole you're going to get drawn to and never find your way out. Sound anything like the meditation we were doing? A journey of descent?
Yeah.
You know? I remember, this reminded me of when I was with my first teacher. He was just this character. He said to me one day, he said, go home and look in the mirror and tell me what you see. Went home. I don't remember what my answers were, but I came back the next day, told him my answer, and he said, go look again. And I did that. Next day I came back, he said, go look again. By about 5-6 days into it, it was just laughter. That's all I got from him, was laughter then. So, right? And it was ridiculous because I kept going home and I was doing the practice. I was looking in the mirror, and I would come back and say, I see, you know, a really good person. You know, I'd come back the next day, I see a scared little boy. You know, and everything was being dismissed. And it went on and it went on. I don't know how many, probably 2 weeks it went on of me doing this little game with him, of looking in the mirror. And then it sort of dawned on me that nothing I was going to say was going to be right. Because everything that I was saying was just some conclusion I was arriving at, right? And it started to, and after enough frustration and not being able to get his validation and approval for what I saw, it started to really sink in that this wasn't about coming up with some nice pithy answer. It was about recognizing that I have no fucking clue who I am looking at in the mirror, right? And it was from that point on that our work could actually go forward together. Because before that, I was just too full of my ideas about who I am, right? I was too holding on to those things too tightly to have any willingness to touch the mystery that was there underneath, you know? And so all of my self-images in those 2 weeks or whatever it was surfaced, you know? I had images of being confident and solid. I had images of being a scared little kid. I had images of being this, I don't know, sexy Casanova. I had all sorts of images were arising, and none of them were solid, right? Proven by the fact that it was one different image after another. None of them were solid. So that, you know, naturally that makes us begin to shake. If none of those are solid, if the foundation, all the bones and structure of what I have constructed as myself, if I can't find solidity or realness in any of them, That's scary for a lot of us to face. But it's the truth of our condition all the time. So we're not talking about facing some scary proposition. What we're doing is facing what is happening all the time in reality, but that we are so unwilling to examine or look at. It's scary when you don't know who you are and can't find who you are to consider opening to such what usually feels like a chaotic experience to people. Somehow it'll feel chaotic. Like without that sense, without that knowing, your life could crumble or fall apart, or that you could dissolve, or right? Like you'd get drawn into a black hole and never be able to find your way out. Like the Beatles said, surrender to the void.
I have this, I'm experiencing this for a while. It's got to do with this, right? I want to buy something and feel happy about what I bought.
I love it. It's so relevant to what we're talking about. Yeah.
It's so annoying because it's whether it's a pair of shoes or the kind of nail polish or the toothbrush or the hair color. It's irrelevant. It's all so unsatisfying. It's actually causing me to be depressed. Like I actually complain about this. Like, isn't there anything good out there? Like, and it doesn't matter what it is. I'm so unsatisfied.
Yes.
And it's got to do with this.
Yes, it does.
Wanting the certainty. I want something to mold me, something that I'm going to be happy about. I'm going to be happy going out with it. I'm going to feel comfortable, and nothing is achieving that.
Yes.
And
It's like being there on an extremely hot, blistery day, jumping into a pool, getting refreshed, and hoping that you're going to stay cool and refreshed as you get out of the pool.
Yeah.
But you walk down the street, and by the time you walk down the street, you're dry and hot and angry again.
Yeah, there's nothing there that's just giving that excitement it would have given.
That's right.
I'm like grabbing.
And this really represents a mature experience in spiritual unfolding. Because it's at that point, you look around your world and you start to feel like everything is flat. Like nothing has it's like you used to go to the sushi restaurant and you loved going to the sushi restaurant. Now you go to the sushi restaurant and it just feels flat. And it's like, what happened to my sushi restaurant? What happened to it? What happened to, that chocolate bar I look forward to each night, whatever. And you find that nothing will satisfy you. And normally for the human being, this is an excruciating experience because it's like nothing has changed. You can look, your chocolate bar is the same, the sushi restaurant's the same, it's all the same, but somehow all of what it once gave you, it's giving you nothing now. And you're trying to figure out desperately how to get the sushi restaurant or chocolate or something to give you a feeling again, right? And so the world starts to feel like very much like cardboard, and you yourself, you start to feel very much like cardboard. Kind of lifeless, one-dimensional, flat. And this is an important part. I'm glad you said, because the connection is extremely relevant. Because at that point, you're starting to see how unsatisfying it is to place your satisfaction in the world outside of you. Right? And that's not just in the chocolate bar and the sushi restaurant, it's also in your self-images and ideas. And those are what are coming to the surface, is I'm no longer satisfied with my idea of myself. I'm no longer satisfied with this idea of myself. And so what's going on the inside is being experienced on the outside. And this is, for most individuals, this is a very difficult phase to navigate because you start to feel a little bit depressed. Like there's nothing in your world that will ever feel good and happy and enlivening again. But if we can hang on and stay with what's happening, something is unfolding from this.
So one of my solutions was I'll order 5 pairs of shoes.
You get to get broke in the process too.
But what came out of the process from last week to now was, at the same time, there's this big longing for a beautiful home, longing for all these things that I want it now, like my little girl. It's now, And you said we should go something about the longing. That's the good part. So every time I long for a house, because I'm longing for a house, not just the 5 pairs of shoes, that'd be great on top of it. But so instead of going to the house, I shoot back to the longing.
Mm.
So every time, so I've been, stalking myself. And so that's been really interesting, because when I jump back to the longing, it's kind of exotic. The feeling is
Yes.
extremely,
That's a good word for it.
it's
Exotic.
exotic. I actually say, I feel it's the same as an orgasm. The feeling at the center is the exact same feeling. And it sits right out here, and it's kind of fascinating. I haven't been beyond that, but just to be there, it's like, it's painful, it's exotic, it's pulling, it's, so it's putting a lot of wave potential of the longing, the house. Like, the longing is still there, but every time I do it, I just pull back and like, what is that feeling? What is that? And it's very knife-like. It's very
Yes.
it's a very interesting thing, but I didn't connect it with the buying shoes or how really unsatisfied I am. It's driving me insane.
Yep.
I mean, I want to buy 5 pairs of shoes, that's insane. But the insanity of that, and I was just talking to Zane about this morning, how depressed I am about this.
Yes.
And then the longing for the house at the same time happening, and then doing what you suggested last week. What about jumping back into
That's
the
right.
longing? So it's created a whole lot of conflicting stuff happening.
Yep. Yep. This is beautiful. This is beautiful. This is exactly what we were aimed at last week, is when we see that longing is present, what we ordinarily do is we aim our longing toward a thing or a situation or a condition that we're trying to fulfill. And we miss the juice, the aliveness, like Ulrika's saying, that it is exactly like the experience of orgasm. The ecstasy in it, the silence in it, all of it. It's all there in the longing if we will go in toward the longing rather than out to try to fulfill it. What does the home represent? What is it about the home?
I've always wanted a home. Always.
But what is it? What is the feeling it
And
creates?
feelings like I belong.
Aha.
I belong.
Right. So the longing is for
I
the
belong.
belonging.
I belong.
Yes.
This is my certainty.
Yes.
If I have the house, then that's me.
Right.
That's my point of where I start living.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Until then, I haven't lived.
Right.
That's the foundation for me to be able to live.
Right. Isn't that what we say? Isn't it?
That's like
Right.
crazy.
We
but that's
have-
what it is.
Right. We have conditions, right? I'll live when, I will show up when, I will fully be myself when, I will, all the different versions we have about what it is we're waiting for. As if there's going to be something that's going to arrive that's going to then sort of magically give us this permission. It's beautiful to want a home. It's beautiful to want what a home gives. So we're not taking exception in the wanting of a home. But like Ulrika's saying, identifying that waiting. Because, and this is part of what happens, the conflict that happens in our longing, is that our longing is an aliveness that's happening now. But what we normally do with it is we plug it into a formula for something, some condition that isn't there yet. And so we put off our sense of being alive or our sense of being at peace for the satisfaction of these conditions. And the stronger we are taught to believe that those conditions will create what it is we want, the more belief we have in it. Like you cannot convince a person who has not made $1 billion that $1 billion will not make them happy. Because they're firmly convinced this is what I need to be happy. Only on gaining $1 billion will they realize it didn't work. Right? So sometimes we have to go that way. Sometimes we actually have to satisfy our conditions. Because what will be funny about it is you'll satisfy your conditions and your longing will still be there. Which, if you see that as a problem, will be like, fuck, that didn't work. But if you see it as just the impulse of life to continue to give birth to more life, more beauty, more expansion, then it's a beautiful thing. Then the acquisition of our new home, our new car, $1 billion, is one very tiny little thing in the whole picture. Is where there's a famous Buddhist poem where the poet says, if you ask me what I want, I'll tell you I want everything. A home? That's not enough. Your longing is not going to be satisfied until it has everything. That's how big your longing is. And if you try to get your longing to go away, you're working against the very impulse of life in you to have everything or to be everything. Which is why our... Go ahead.
I don't think our species would have come to dominate all of the biomass on the planet if it didn't have a longing. I mean, longing is extremely instrumental in evolution.
Yeah, it
Not
is.
defending it.
On many levels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Saying it's there with an effect,
Yep.
and some of those effects are negative.
Yep. Not ultimately negative, but temporarily negative, perhaps. Because every negative consequence of our longing fulfilled leads to a clarification of our longing. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? It's like, if you fulfill what you're longing for and you realize it didn't satisfy you, your longing clarifies as a result of that. Which is a part of creation. That's a part of existence. In that way, we will never arrive at the feeling of perfection. So this is going right back to our search for certainty. You'll never arrive at completion. It's not possible. Would you want it? If you could have completion, if you could have a static, stationary, stable, never-changing state, would you have it? No way. No way. You would be cutting off the very substance of life in all of its change and flow and dynamism. Right? So if we stop aiming towards some final solid experience or state, and we start realizing that it's all a part of a dynamic flow that's happening, and we get out of our way with that, something very beautiful then. Then the mystery is not only a solid mystery, it's a mystery that's here as existence, always changing, always evolving, always growing and expanding, and that is exciting. The longing that you have inside of you is the same longing that belongs to the entire universe to continue expanding and evolving. It's no different. We could say, if we were speaking in theological terms, theistic terms, that longing is God's desire to create and experience itself. And so it is doing so in continuously new and exciting and expansive ways. Eternal, infinite, never changing, never ending change. So why would we seek a solid state? You see the conundrum in seeking certainty? We're seeking a finality of some kind. There isn't one.
People like to say, be happy a lot. Like, then you'll be happy. Or, I just want you to be happy. And that kind of gets under my skin a little bit. It's like, what? Who would want to be happy all the time? Like, that's insane.
Mm-mm. Yeah, it's crazy.
I want to be sad a lot so that I can be also happy.
Uh-huh. Yep. Yep. Mostly we don't have the first clue about what happy means. Yep. Yep. You find it curious, someone says, I want you to be happy. What does that mean? Tell me what happiness is.
If somebody says, I want you to be happy, that means I am burdened by your unhappiness, so get over it.
Which further is compounded, that's just the second piece to being burdened by my own unhappiness. Yeah. Right, exactly. Other things today?
What causes this? You go through a spiritual process, everybody does, and you get to that. There's the hope at one point that's like, things are going to get better, right? It's like the flowers are going to smell better, and the colors are going to be more vibrant. And when you first become present, that kind of happens. But then you get to that part, that cardboard part.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm stuck in kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And it sucks. And it's like, why am I doing this? Because it's not working either.
Right.
Yeah. But also the 5 pair of shoes in the house, it's not going to work.
Right.
I already know
It's
that. I've tried
it's
it.
a matter of what we would normally refer to as stages or phases of the enlightenment process or the realization process, and there isn't so much a why to it as much as there is understanding what's actually happening at that point, because a person just new to the spiritual dance won't experience what you're talking about. They will experience the spiritual path, like you said, like a candy shop. A sense of promise will be there with it. I'm going to feel better. My life is going to work out better. The flowers are going to smell richer. And that is true of that phase of the journey. But, the phase we're talking about with the cardboard is not unlike what is spoken of as the dark night of the soul, in that we're going through a process where our hope and our sense of promise have gotten us into something that is now reaching a kind of fruition or maturity. And what it's doing is it's decomposing an old form of experience. Because if the person who starts the journey with that sense of promise is still there when the promise is actually being fulfilled, then the person who has that sense of promise has to go at a decomposition, a breakdown. And it's a very difficult part of the journey to truly understand, because if we understand it in the larger scheme of things, that, this is just a previous model of myself that is decomposing, it's all good. But when you're inside of it, it feels hellish. It feels like, what the fuck is the point of all this? Why would I bother to meditate? It's like because what we're seeing at that point is our sense of promise is coming undone. And that's usually very difficult to navigate. It's very painful to navigate. But there is something intelligent happening. I can assure you of that. That if you're arriving upon that experience of cardboard and plastic and nothing is fulfilling and your spiritual practice isn't working, it means that there's a phase of experience that you are moving into or through that is very important here. And, we have to be able to just, in a sense, face that with as much acceptance and allowing as possible. That this is just the experience, but it's not a final experience. It's so easy when we're having this type of experience to feel like, well, if it's this bad now, it's only going to get worse, right? But you're walking through a barren landscape. It's like you started at the beach and you were like, wow, it is beautiful. There's palm trees and there's, wonderful sand and there's coconuts and there's pineapples and whatever. And you walk inland and you're discovering the lush landscape, and what's there beyond the mountains? A desert, right? And so you get in the desert and it's like, but this isn't it. I wanted the beach, right? And at that point, because you're in the middle of the desert, you don't really know. You could turn around and go back, but suddenly that feels pointless. Like, why would you do that? You've already seen the beach, you've already eaten the coconuts, you've already eaten the pineapples. What would be the point of going backward? You can't find any motivation to go backward You don't feel much motivation to go forward, right? And there you are in the desert where it's dry and hot and there's no fruit and there's no water and it's kind of cardboardy, right? But there is something happening. There's a reason why Jesus was there in the desert for 40 days. There's a reason why the sages were described as being in the desert for long periods of time. Because the desert is not, it's not cacti. It's an inner state that we're passing through. And, I wouldn't dare give a sense of promise and say, well, there's another lush beach just around the corner. Because then we would get all hopeful again. It would take us actually back to our previous state that we were already in. But if we are willing to travel the desert, there is something that is unfolding from it. Right? The journey of descent that we talked about in meditation will pass through layers that are absolutely dark and stark. It does help. In my various navigations of those states, I found it was very difficult to experience those places and understand them without some help. Because I needed someone who had gone through the desert, who could assure me that this was what was supposed to be happening and not just that my life was suddenly, because you can get to the point at times where you feel like you're going to end up in a mental institution, right? If you really go down this rabbit hole, it can feel that way. Or maybe it's just me, I don't know. Yeah. Right? So it helps. It helps to have a friend, a companion who can say, look, this is natural, it's all part of the dance, all part of the game. It's okay. If we can understand that the self that we have built, the self that we have created as a part of spiritual evolution or human growth is going to be disassembled and undone, it starts to make sense to us that there's going to be certain experiences that feel very bad about that, right? Hidden pockets of desire or hope that are going to get exposed, that there's going to be pain involved. In fact, what most people do in spiritual dance is they get in with that sense of promise, and as soon as it's painful, it's like, I'm out, right? I had a better time when I was skiing, and it's a lot easier or it's not a lot easier actually, it's more comfortable to just go skiing instead. But if you're willing to take this journey, right, and you're willing to face those difficult landscapes that arise in your experience, I won't even tell you there's a sense of promise because that would be to mislead you, but there is something taking place here. It's not by mistake.
It appears that everything in that state is so frivolous, or maybe that's what drops you into that state, is that the shoes don't work, the truck doesn't work, whatever doesn't work for you, and so what could possibly work for you?
Exactly. Now let's look at that statement, because that's a brilliant statement. Let's look at that statement in terms of looking and seeing that statement clearly. Nothing has worked to fulfill you. You're arriving at the feeling that nothing that you do or experience or have is going to fulfill you. What do you think you're coming upon? What do you think you're on the verge of understanding, or that you're in the process of understanding? Don't think too hard about this. It's very simple.
Happiness doesn't come from the material world.
Yeah. Very simple. Right? But you're learning it at such a level that it's like, holy shit, it was better than when that was just an idea in my head. You're learning it at a different level of your being. Because why do we seek fulfillment outside of ourselves? What is happening in us that makes us seek fulfillment outside of ourselves?
Unrest within ourselves.
Unrest, lack of fulfillment. What does that lack of fulfillment feel like in you?
Empty.
Doesn't it kind of feel like a desert, dry landscape? Doesn't it kind of feel like cardboard? This is the part of your being that you're traversing as you move through that. You're taking what was at first an idea that was true and real and exciting, that all the fulfillment of existence lives inside of you. Now you're experiencing it at such a level that you're passing through the lack of fulfillment that's there as the barrier, the boundary.
I think what might be darker is that it's not just personal when you see it, it's so much of society's constraints are also driven by the accumulation.
Yeah.
of the mass.
This is why there was such a need in the ancient times and today for real spiritual communities. Because if you look at your condition as dry and empty and hollow and unfulfilled, what do you think you're going to find in society? You're going to find exactly the same thing. So it was important in the traditional setting that there were gatherings of people who came together to say there's another possibility. Because otherwise, all you've got is your own dry experience and the empty promises of society. And at that point, it sort of feels like, where do I go? You know, like those seem to be our only alternatives. And that's where people usually go mad. You know, people usually go mad when those are the only two alternatives that they can find. But it helps to get together with a group of people sitting around saying, look, we're going through this dry, empty, deserty landscape. It sucks, it's horrible, but it's all good. It's all natural. It's all supposed to be happening. Because if you go tell society that, they're going to say, I've got this wonderful product for you. You know, I think what you need is some vitamins. I think what you need is a new hairstyle. I think what you need is some new clothes. Right? Society will give you every remedy to plug every hole, right? So that you don't feel like Swiss cheese anymore.
In this story, right, you're like, there are no promises. I'm like, yeah, I know there are no promises, but I want a promise. But you're in the desert, and I was just thinking, because these stories work really well for me, images work really well, it's like you've left that beach and that oasis and the palms and the coconuts. You go into the desert and it's barren, but really, like, you are the oasis, right? Like, so you, like, that delving in is where you are everything, where you are, where there is the water and there are the coconuts, and you can taste it again, and it's not like it was before.
Right.
And that's okay.
It is. Well, it's
not supposed to be.
It's what we're in the midst of realizing. The trouble is that for most people, when they're in the deserty landscape, it's like, yeah, the oasis is in me, the coconuts are there, the pineapple is there. I know, I've heard that before, I know. Because in that moment, you don't seem to be experiencing that. So it feels like even though you know in your being that that's true, there's still something in us that's like, well, I want the coconuts. The coconut. You know, so that's where we get our 5 pairs of shoes, right? Yeah. In fact, you see, it's one of the signs and symptoms of this phase of experience is we become suddenly outwardly very oriented again. You start buying stuff. You start snacking a lot. You start looking desperately for things outside that either once fulfilled or hold the promise of fulfilling. But don't worry, you'll get over it. You know? You'll eat and then you'll lose weight eventually, or you'll spend all your money, but you'll make more. It's okay. It's okay. What's important is to understand what's happening to you, which I think we've touched on.
What I've seen friends go through this when I was younger. You know, I always had quite a lot of spiritual friends, but some of them never came out of this place.
Because they don't have the guidance usually.
Well, normally what I saw with them is that they always thought they knew better. Like they
Right.
read so much, and they did have maybe that guidance when they were younger, but now they're much older, and they just, and sometimes when you read people's books, the experiences seem so amazing that you are not having any of those amazing experiences, you know. It's just the way that people are writing it. And so I've seen people just stay here, you
Yes.
know, just stay, and then eventually they just die of a heart attack or something like that. It's quite sad. And so it's a very dangerous place in the place just to, you know, I think if you reach it younger, it's maybe easier to get over it, you know, at a certain, where I've seen people just stay.
Yep.
Stay.
It's when you look into the eyes of someone and they've got sort of a half-baked realization, and they've gotten some essential truths and experiences, but their eyes are dead. You can see that the life is not there. The aliveness isn't there because they don't have the tools or resources or guidance to move through that phase of experience, and so they just end up camping out there.
A lot of scholastic legalism or legalists out there.
Say this again?
People know a lot of things.
Yes.
We've all studied the billion-dollar industry, self-help books. We've had all those on our shelf, and that's not the experience, you know. Going in, so the light's not on. Really, it's just a lot of, you know, hope that the net, you know, just a lot of information that
Yeah.
not necessarily.
And that hope and that information are important parts of our journey at a certain point.
Mhm.
They really are. Without it, we wouldn't have the sufficient interest and inspiration to continue the journey when we get into the desert. So we don't discount those experiences. We don't discount the influences that those teachings or those practices or whatever have had, because they're valuable. I mean, I realized at a certain point, like if I hadn't had some of the experiences that I had early on, there's things I never would have been willing to face at all. At all. You know? Because what our initial spiritual glimpses do is they give us a taste of what lies beyond the journey. You know, you temporarily get a taste. And you can have that in an enlightenment experience. You can have that by taking a little psychedelics. You get a sense of what's there when all the filters and all the resistance are wiped away. But as that experience passes, the filters and the resistance come back in, and then you've got to traverse the territory. You've got to move through it. There's no stabilization of our spiritual experiences unless we traverse all the territory, unless we move through. But we need that initial hit of promise. Otherwise, people don't have what it takes to take up the journey. We have to have that sense of promise to initiate the journey. Okay, let's end there. I'll see you soon. Just as a note, for any of you who may have thought of going to Course in Miracles tomorrow, we will not have Course in Miracles group tomorrow. But we'll pick back up next week. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Namaste.
Namaste.